journalist with 30 years experience writing on offbeat subjects. He's a native San Diegan. He's been a staff writer with HuffPost since 2011, specializing in weird news. Previously, Moye was the senior editor of Wireless Flash, a news agency that provided The Daily Show, Good Morning America, and many other shows with guest booking and news segments. And in his spare time, he plays AC/DC on the ukulele, and he does psychic readings for B-grade celebrities.
I was also an extra on Full House. That's important.
That's important.
Yeah.
So we want to welcome David and Jean. And now that we know a little bit about your hobbies, David and Jean, what about work? How has your work been affected by COVID-19 and what has changed?
Let's see, I'll start. As far as big picture business, we've been really lucky in that our client base is so diversified that we haven't lost much work at all, unlike some of my counterparts who specialize in retail and restaurants who have been hit really hard. So knock on wood, I'm really glad about that. As far as media relations, we actually got 2 big national projects during COVID, which we thought were a slam dunk because one had a COVID angle and the other one had a Tiger King angle. And if there was anything that people were talking about besides COVID, it was Tiger King. So we thought we had a really good opportunity and we were very excited about it. But our biggest challenge is that no one was answering their phone because no one was at their desk. And we don't know the cell phone numbers of national journalists. So it really, really, really made our job much more difficult. We had to rely on email and we had to rely on some social pitches to really break through. Also, just the news cycle in general was happening so quickly. Like we thought we would have something that was really hot that was COVID related, but the news was reporting on it and moving right away to something else. So we missed the boat just a couple of times on it. So it's been, it's been really challenging. It's been very hard to rise above the COVID noise. We pretty much stopped all pitching locally except for anything that was COVID related. But I think things are now turning around a little bit and making our job easier.
That's good.
In the first part of the time, a lot of what I was trying to do was be careful about the tone that we would approach on stories. That was like, I think in the first 3 weeks, that was the big stress is, how should this be covered? How do you want to cover it? Making sure to be kind of accurate. And a lot of what I do is like weird news. I say news that raises an eyebrow, makes the mouth drop. And I'm covering a lot of different stuff, politics, religion, anything, as long as it's weird entertainment. So, but at the same time, with COVID being serious and the not knowing being kind of a key, I kind of like I found myself kind of holding back a little bit. I think there were some days where I may have focused more on posting wires rather than doing stories, but it's gotten back to normal. A lot of what I do is based on like water cooler stories. So all I have to do is look up a Trump tweet and, see how the people are reacting. And I can do kind of a Twitter reaction thing that, those are still working. And, but a lot of it is trying to keep the tone, especially when we're talking about that. And since that can sometimes be an issue for me, I've had to kind of because my default is, can I be funny? And so I've learned to be a little bit more careful about looking for my lane where to do that from.
So David, did you actually write any weird COVID stories?
I've written some. I mean, I was trying to look up some of that stuff. Like, for instance, a lot of the stuff would be like, I wasn't going to do any conspiracy theories. I wasn't going to do anything that's going to be like a dubious claim. Oh, a miracle cure. I wasn't going to do anything like that. So a lot of it was more like reactions to things, like people going crazy about not wearing a mask, or Trump claiming that if we test for more cases, then we'll have more cases, and therefore, and some of the idiocy with that. So a lot of it was more like people reaction. There was a local artist, or no, there was a publicist who represents artists who were, their business was making a lot of rock concert posters. And since there are no concerts, what are they going to do? Well, they kind of turned it into doing a lot of like COVID and coronavirus type of posters to kind of raise awareness about that. And that was a sort of story that, the posters were all there. It was something that I didn't know if it would get a lot of hits, but I thought there'd be a long tail that would get hits over the time. And plus there would be a gallery of COVID posters that I could use when I'm doing other COVID stories. Because a lot of it, when I'm doing stories, it's not just the story itself. It's like, what can I put at the bottom that's going to, keep people clicking? What visuals can I put at the top? And so that was one example, the posters.
That's a good one.
You've talked about the content of the media of what you're doing changing, and Jean's talking about the outreach has changed during COVID. What do you see for the changes in the media landscape? I mean, jobs and some, publications going away during this time.
Yeah, sorry, you want to go?
No, your turn.
Okay. I mean, the media landscape is obviously very troublesome, the local media landscape. For me, especially because I'm a print person, which is probably a generational thing, but I like reading the daily newspaper and magazines. I don't like to read everything online. So that makes me nervous. And I'll stop and put my little public service announcement in, which is all San Diego PR people that need to support the local media. I mean, they are our livelihood in some respects. So, subscribing to the UT and the Transcript and the Business Journal and San Diego Magazine and becoming members of KPBS and Voice, really, we need to support them. So that's my little soapbox. That's my only public service announcement for tonight.
Okay.
The other thing is just more and more, and we've been talking about this, but journalists creating their own platform. I mean, if you have credibility, if you have deep experience in something, if you have a good social media following, create your own thing and try to monetize it later. I mean, for instance, Ryan Bradford, who was a humor writer for San Diego City Beat, launched a blog called Awkward SD, Awkward San Diego. And it's great. He's a great writer, and he's asked for, $35 a year in membership. I have another friend and colleague who has deep experience, respect, following in one particular social justice issue. And, it's been challenging for her to find places to get published. So it's like, if she launched her own platform, and I know this isn't easy, I know it takes time, but more and more, I mean, I think that's what reputable journalists are looking at. And if it works, you can monetize it by selling advertising or subscriptions or memberships. But marketers just in general have to launch more of their own content these days because the media is diminishing, unfortunately.
So what you're describing sounds like more like when people stopped cutting the cord with cable and started streaming. So like journalists are going to end up streaming rather than the newspaper, which is more like cable, having everything there that you can just click.
And the explosion of podcasts.
Yeah. And podcasts too. I mean, all these things there's no cost to launch them. It's just about marketing the hell out of them, and getting your following. But that's for qualified journalists anyway. And we don't want citizen journalists.
Uh-oh. Okay. Well, maybe I'll still have a chance anyway.
Yeah.
I think with the future of, San Diego, unfortunately, has never been it's always kind of, San Diego more than other cities is a city where if you say you're a writer, people will look at you kind of weird, or maybe they just look at me weird anyway, but it's not, it's a city that doesn't necessarily, it's really sad. It's sad. Of course, we have one major league sports team and one newspaper that, is kind of working. I honestly don't know necessarily where journalism is going. I'm hoping that like magazines like San Diego Magazine and the Reader are hopefully going to kind of like get back on board. But I think, for the next 18 months is going to be kind of touch and go. I know that this reminds me of like 2009 and 10 when we had the second Bush recession, and you know, a lot of people were being laid off and off of journalism jobs, and then trying to, like me, going into PR so that they could pitch to the out of work journalists. And I think I'm eventually things got back to normal, but I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years down the line, maybe we'll have a better thing. It looks pretty dire right now.
That's right, David. You did a stint in PR. I remember that.
That
How
was
was that for you?
I think I think a lot of journalists would recommend would benefit from doing PR in the middle of their career like I did, because it does teach you humility. I certainly learned a lot from doing the job. I'd say I got a little bit less off my a little bit, let's baby steps, a little bit off my journalism high horse doing that. And I think it's also given me a better idea of overall. I mean, I like publicists. I often have felt like the main difference between publicists and journalists is that publicists a lot of times have social skills. So, I mean, I've enjoyed working with, I have a lot of friends and stuff that are publicists. It was interesting. I felt in many ways my journalism career took off when I did PR. All of a sudden, apparently in terms of as a PR person, I was a good journalist, because all of a sudden I had the same struggle fighting to get gigs and stuff that other journalists have. And all of a sudden when I did PR and I was recognized, it was like getting on an elevator where all of a sudden San Diego Magazine and other publications that, you know, they would answer my pitches a little bit more. So, I mean, that's one benefit of going into PR that journalists don't always think of. It might give you access to people that ordinarily don't want to talk to you.
Well, I think the storytelling angle is a really good transition to jump into the heart of the presentation that you're going to give. And Jean, we want to know, what are the 5 things PR people don't want to hear from journalists? So David.
Okay, well, first of all, I just want to encourage everybody to join us in a cocktail, because we did say it was cocktail hour. So this is a drinking presentation. Just want to preface it by that. Okay, good. Okay, so what we don't want to hear from journalists anymore. First thing is radio silence. Okay, we don't want radio silence. If we have done our job, if we have researched you, if we are writing you a targeted pitch, we understand what your beat is. And we're writing a pitch that's specific to you. It's not a humongous pitch that's going everywhere. Please respond to us. It can be a no, it can be a no thank you. You know, whatever it may be, it will cut down on the calls. If you don't want us to call you, then respond to us. But please, at least the people that you respect. And I know the other thing, the one I didn't say is, we know that journalists get hundreds of PR pitches a day. We know that. You don't have to tell us that anymore. But just a courtesy of a response to PR people that are reputable, trying, and credible would be great. Thank you very much. Okay, second one.
Others? Yes.
Ridiculous requests. We know we have a service to the media to give them a great story. We have a service to our clients to produce a good story, as much as we can do that, as much as we can control that. But some of the requests that we've gotten from the media are just outright outrageous. For example, we were publicizing a line of snorkeling equipment. And one local TV station, who shall remain nameless, but I don't think they're around, they're not around anymore anyway, wanted us, shall remain nameless, wanted us to set up a whole above ground pool in their back lot and have models there modeling the snorkeling equipment. I mean, come on, we're willing to do a lot, but that was ridiculous. Another example is we do a lot of work in the immigration area, but somebody, a journalist, and this wasn't a local journalist, it was actually a national journalist, asking for an on-camera interview with an immigrant family while they were in the midst of fleeing like death, destruction, drug lords, retaliation. They didn't want to blur the person. They wanted to be able to do the interview, you know, with the family on camera, which is just downright dangerous. So we know our job is to serve you. We will bend over backwards, but we do have to draw the line somewhere. So, all right, next one is the no phone calls, please. Okay, so every list that you see from a journalist about how to work with PR people says no phone calls, please. But in my gazillion years of experience in PR, the most successful we have been is when we can get a journalist on the phone. I mean, not always, but predominantly when we can get somebody on the phone, 9 times out of 10, they haven't seen our pitch, you know, and I'm not talking about the kind of phone call where you call, you know, did you receive my press release? But either a brief phone call that just reiterates your pitch very succinctly and very quickly, or just add something else to the pitch that wasn't in the original one that might entice you as well. That's all. So we are going to call you. We're not going to stop calling you. So one way you can cut down on us calling you is to respond to our emails. So,
you know, and David may be able to address this too, but I have heard the counterpoint to that from journalists who say the reason we don't respond is because even if we tell you no, the PR person will think that's a form of engagement. And then they'll write again to say, well, maybe you didn't understand this point, or maybe if I tell you a little bit more about the story. And I've heard journalists say that drives them crazy, that once they've said no, it's no. So I've heard point counterpoint in that one.
I can't say that we have pushed it much when we've gotten no's. I mean, I'm sure there's been circumstances where we've been like, this person could not have heard this right, because we just, but yeah, rarely do we push that no. But I mean, David, in some of the pitches that he sent me today, I mean, people came, after he said no, people came back to you all the time.
And I don't mind that necessarily. I mean, because it's like, honestly, I feel like, you know, it is, if you do build a relationship, even if you say no now, maybe they'll have, I'm always holding out that maybe if somebody understands what my niche is, and most of the time when I'm dealing with publicists, it's not for the hard news, wacky stuff. I'm dealing with specifically, I do 5 weird gift guides each year for HuffPost. I do them for all the gift giving holidays, Christmas, Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, Father's Day. I do a tasteless Halloween costume, and sometimes I'll do it during election years if they have like cool presidential swag, I'll do that stuff. But I have a specific niche. I don't necessarily mind the phone calls and the dialogue, but what's really frustrating is when I work with somebody for a while and they know that I'm going to judge on the photo. If I'm doing a weird gift guide, it's a photo-centric gallery that it doesn't matter what the product is. If I don't like the photo, it's not going to go in. So where I get frustrated is when I've had a relationship with someone over a while and they're still, you know, they still have me set aside as like a serious journalist, and you know they're assuming stuff, and even though I've broken it down for them, so I get a little bit impatient and stuff. My wife used to get crazy because she'd see me trying to educate publicists on my niche, on my weird news sort of thing, and it was like you can't lead them to water if they don't want to drink, and it was like, okay. So now a lot of times if a pitch doesn't work, I'll just say I'm going to pass and leave it pretty much at that. If there's something where I feel like I can help, or where a tip, you know, like, okay, like in the case of, I don't remember exactly, but after COVID broke, there were a few tone deaf pitches, you know, people trying to say that some herbal supplement that was obviously had not been judged by the FDA or anything, might be the COVID thing that we need. If somebody says something like that, you're getting into dangerous ground here by doing something like this. Or if I can see that somebody's doing a kind of a pitch that's a little bit lame, but I can tell by their handle that they're an intern, I might reach out and sort of explain, hey, this is like one of those things. Like we were talking about this earlier, a lot of times some not professional publicists, like people in the San Diego Press Club, but like somebody that's, you know, thinks that well, I can do PR just as good as, paying somebody. They'll like try and give me, I'll try and explain why something doesn't work, and I lost my train of thought. But basically, people are, just trust me. I try and be straightforward, but I can't change everybody's mind. I have to be very specific that what I'm looking for, and I have a form letter of things that I'm looking for. And if they don't do that at some point, I don't go to blocking them, but I just have to say, if there is there is some situation where I feel like I can help somebody, give them some advice, tell them that there's a problematic pitch that they should avoid, I'll try and do that. But at the same time, my main, I still got to crank out 3 to 5 stories a day. So that's part of the problem.
David, I did notice. So David forwarded me some pitches earlier today because we were going to talk about some pitches. And I got your responses too, and you're probably going to be sorry for sending them to me, although I thought they were very entertaining. But you're definitely poking at publicists sometimes.
Sometimes I've tried to be better about that, but yeah, I mean. Yeah.
And I have to say they sort of deserve it, but.
Is that on your list of things that bother you, Jean?
Well, like, kind of, I'm guilty. But I mean, the thing is, I sometimes you're having a rough moment. You're trying to like do something. Somebody does a pitch and it's not going to work. And, or like, for instance, somebody will pitch me. Today I got a pitch for somebody that's doing they're a real estate company that is, you can hire a home exorcist. If you want to sell your home through them and you're worried that it might be haunted and not sell, they have a home exorcist. So that was weird. I was into that. So I was asking some details. Who is this person? What do they do and how do they do it? And they said, well, that's when the thing started falling apart. They said, well, the exorcist doesn't really want to do interviews. And it's like, okay, so you can't even give me the name. No. And it's like, well, what are his techniques? Oh, I think he does some praying. So it's like they had me with home exorcist, and then everything that they started doing, it was like the balloon slowly letting out the air. It's like, okay, I'm not going to get any wacky photos of somebody doing a seance in the house. I'm not going to get, I'm not going to get an interview with a guy who's going to say, certain type of ghosts are more likely to be at this type of house. It's like, I held back. I thought that was really lame, but
it was really lame.
But I didn't tell them that it was really lame. I just said I'm going to pass. So I do hear you, and I'm working on it.
Yeah. The reality is that we'd rather have a response, sarcastic or not, than no response. Bring it on. While we were doing this national pitching, and we just thought we had such a slam dunk story, and really wrote some tight, good pitches. We just, even getting a no thank you for us was exciting because there were so many people not responding to a typically very good pitch, so even like no thank you, or not this time, or keep me on your list, but I already did that story yesterday, whatever it is. So
you felt like you didn't go out into the void and with no response.
Yeah. So we know we can take that person off our list and move on to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay.
So now I just remembered today, there was one pitch that I actually tried to pitch to you as a journalist. And I know I'm not necessarily supposed to do that, but Jean used to, do you still handle the Aqualung account?
No.
Oh, you used to handle Aqualung, and I knew the publicist for Jethro Tull, and when they were there was this dream I wanted to have some kind of photo of Aqualung meets Aqualung, but for whatever reason, that my dream, it's like my dream, it didn't necessarily come. I thought for sure, just knowing what I know, that if you even do a photo of Aqualung meeting Aqualung, that would be the type of thing that would have gotten a lot of press, but
Right. What happened? I think the client didn't want to do it for some reason.
Yeah, well, I think you would have had to in order to get the Jethro Tull guy, I think you would have had to donate money to like a pet charity or something, and it would have. And I guess they probably thought that the payoff wasn't going to be kind of like big enough for what it was. But I mean,
They just don't understand the awesomeness of Jethro Tull like we do.
right. Well, I mean, you know,
It's
who
always
does?
nice
So,
when a journalist is thinking about a publicist's client. That's
Yeah,
in a positive way like that.
definitely, definitely.
well, I mean, you know, you know, there are some times where there are certain publicists that over the years, especially where I knew I could go to them if I needed an expert on something. There was one publicist when that used to only handle psychics. And so I could come up with, this is when I was working at Wireless Flash, which was it used to be Copley News Radio, and then it became its own entity when it separated from Copley. There's a bizarre story about how that happened that I'd be
I'd
happy
like
to
see
share.
that.
But the you know, we would call up this one publicist, and it's like where we just come up with a crazy question or something, and she'd find somebody who could answer the question and everything, and that was nice. Now I can't do that at HuffPost nowadays. The last thing that you know, a HuffPost, it's more of a straightforward news actually happened, and not me you know, wonder what would happen and stuff. But that does go on. People in, you know, the news business, oh, wait a sec, maybe this is something. And those are the funnest stories to write.
Yeah, I bet.
Dean, I lost track. Do we have one left on your list?
We have two left.
Two.
So the next one is vague responses. Vague responses. I know I just said complained about not getting any response, but the other thing is a vague response. I mean, journalists are communicators too, for God's sakes. We don't know what to do with some of the responses that they give us. And they burden both of us by being so ambiguous. So here's some examples. So this is a response to a pitch. Okay, thanks. That sounds really good. Or cool. I mean, what are we supposed to do with? They sound very promising. They sound like they might be interested in, but we're just increasing our workload by having to, okay, does that mean you're interested? Would you like to set up an interview? Would you like to come and visit?
See, now we were talking about this earlier, and I'm almost convinced that if somebody says that sounds really good, it's usually like you're offering a sample and they're trying to say that they want the sample without actually like begging for it. So, but the other ones I agree. And I get vague pitches too, where you want to interview my client, you know, and it's like, why am I interviewing your client? You know, stuff. And it's like, that isn't very helpful to me at all.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that. And if they want freebies, they need to word that in another way. Like, oh, I'm not interested in the story right now, but I may be in the future. Why don't you send me your product to try out, you know, and we'll see, something like that.
Right.
So.
But I mean, one of the first journalism lessons I learned is, you know, you can offer free cake at a place, but you can't make you can't make that the selling point. That journalists get kind of insulted when you assume that the only reason they're coming is for food and drinks, even though
that's why you are coming.
That's why they're coming. Yeah.
Yeah, of course so. Of course. Right.
Let's just admit that.
Right. All right. So my last one is the question that we get occasionally, which is, who else have you pitched this to? We understand that you don't want to report on the same old news as everybody else, but you do have your own target audience that you need to spread the news to. And there's some stories that are going to appear on multiple platforms. So, so we have some suggestions for, instead of who else have you pitched this to, which is an awkward sort of off-putting question for us. There are some better ways to ask this to get the same result. So, for example, has anyone else done the story? Or is it possible to get this story exclusively? Or, you know, is an exclusive possible? Or even better, our favorite is, how can my story be different than others? Because really, as PR people, I know I said we get ridiculous requests, but a lot of our day is spent, you know, turning somersaults to meet deadlines, to get photos, to get interviews, to figure out a new angle. So it's our job, it's the public relations pro job, you know, to come up with a new interviewee, new photos, whatever it is, a new angle.
Yeah, it's putting it back into your court to be creative and come up with a new angle.
Yeah, so we're happy to do that, but we don't like the who else have you pitched this to kind of thing. Inside baseball, insider baseball. So,
and let's hear
anyway,
from the other side, David.
5, and you know, I could probably keep going, but
yeah, and I'm sure in the questions we'll get more, you know, more into that. David, what are 5 things journalists don't want to hear from PR people? You talked about some of them.
Well, I mean, I filed a restraining order, and there's nothing you can do about it. But that may be a little too inside baseball for me. If a journalist gets an email, if you as a publicist send me an email that begins, "I hope this letter finds you well," 99% of the time, I know I'm going to get a tip that's way off topic. And plus, it also, when you say things like, "I hope this letter finds you well," it makes me think that you're like wearing a straw hat like Dick Van Dyke and Mary Poppins, and you know, have one of those curly mustaches or something. So basically, any press release that includes the phrase, that includes a quote that begins, "We are so excited," won't be exciting at all. Okay. Also, you know, if a journalist is rude or indignant to you, it might be because you're generally horrible at your job, or you look like somebody who turned us down for a date in college. Now, if you're pitching a story to a weird news journalist and he explains that your story isn't that weird, don't huffily retort that weird is a relative term and therefore he's wrong, because usually that comeback doesn't make me change my mind. I mean, I realize weird is subjective, but I've been doing it for 30 years. So, you know, I will get pitched sometimes stories that might on one hand sound weird to the average person. There was a story that we were talking about today, Gene and I. Somebody was pitching me a cricket bar, and I know that the bar sounded really weird, but all the photos that they had were just product photos. And since this was for a Father's Day guide, I specifically kept asking, if there's not a cricket or a dad in the photo, I can't use it. And she kept saying, "Well, I think it's a worthy article for inclusion because of this," even though she wasn't able to give me the photo that I was requesting. So that's the sort of thing that gets me in my stuff.
And
also, yes.
I'll agree with you before you move on, David. I mean, I will agree with you about the hyperbole, and not the hyperbole, but the niceties in pitches to journalists you don't know. Like I hope this email finds you well. The journalist doesn't give a shit whether you want him to be well. Just get right to it. Now, if it's somebody that I know, of course I'm going to be like, "Hey, I hope you're well." But otherwise, just get right to your pitch. They don't care if you're having a nice day. Hope you're having a nice day. Happy Friday. Whatever it is, just get to it. And yes, Denise, you are right. All those quotes, the "we are excited," "we are proud," we are welcoming, you know, don't just cut those out of your quotes completely. You can you can keep a quote and you can get right to the meat, or get some important information into a quote that you couldn't fit somewhere else in a press release.
And don't send me a photo of a bunch of self-satisfied executives with their hands awkwardly in front of their body, you know, like they do when they're doing a groundbreaking at a thing. It's like, yeah, you know, you can do a little bit of stuff. Also, if you are doing something if you have a product that you're trying to pitch, when you're doing the photos, don't just send photo shots, but think about doing themed photos for a lot of the gift-giving holidays. I think a lot of times you can, if you have a product that doesn't quite fit, a lot of times a journalist might be inclined, if it's obviously a Mother's Day centric photo or, you know, a Christmas photo, but that's something that doesn't always get thought of when if you're doing the budget in January, you're not necessarily thinking, am I going to get in a gift guide in December, especially if you're on a 6-month contract with, you know, the client or something.
That's a great idea, David. And it's, I think, probably one of our complaints about clients is when they're doing these marketing photo shoots that, you know, more involving advertising in their marketing department, which there's sometimes a split, which there shouldn't be, but that's a whole nother issue. They don't think to consult the PR agency to see what kind of photos do you need? What kind, you know, because they can kill two birds with one stone. So it's like, ask us, you know, or if, unless we can tell you, well, they have the opportunity to tell you, you know, let us get our photos too, because our photos are not the same as the marketing and advertising photos. So anyway,
That's true.
I'm going off on a tangent about clients, but that's
No,
very
no,
good advice.
believe me, clients are
To theme those photos, especially when you have a product.
So what's kind of interesting is sometimes I get pitches where people will praise a really wacky story that I've written. And usually when that happens, I'm partially flattered, but I get nervous because inevitably the pitch that they're going to try won't work for whatever reason. So it's nice to really get the validation. Oh, you're reading my stuff. On the other hand, it's not necessarily carrying over into a future story where I can use. I would also say that if you're pitching a client, you don't have to say they're a great interview. That's real. I hate hearing that because all it tells me is that the guy's rehearsed or the person is going to be over rehearsed. They're going to give canned answers. They're not going to say anything provocative or interesting. I've had luck when I was a publicist by saying, you don't want to talk to my client. I'm afraid to have you talk with my client because he's kind of a loose cannon, no filter. I mean, I'm trying to keep him on message.
And company secrets. Perfect.
Yeah. So really, you can trust me, David. It's like, okay. And also, you don't need to say your client is a family man, because if a journalist is any good, the minute they hear the word family man, they're automatically checking to see what's in this guy's history, because I guarantee every time I read that someone's a family man, 2 months later they get indicted or something. It's just a really weird coincidence that I've noticed. So you can avoid using use family man to describe your client. It'll save you a lot of heartache later on.
Well, we have about 1 minute left before we want to get to a lot of the questions that come in. So any more ridiculous pitches? You talked about the exorcism.
That was fast. Do you want to, what time is it?
6:41.
Wow, okay. We could go right to questions.
We can do that.
If you want.
Okay.
Do we have enough?
Let me see.
Do we have, why am I here?
Time flies while you're having fun, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, Dave, why don't we do this? J Walcher Communications, we have sent David a couple pitches over the years. 2 in particular that I'm thinking of. One is pretty old, one is pretty new.
Right.
One he did the story, and one he didn't do the story. So why don't I talk about these pitches and you can say why you did one and what worked for one and what didn't work for the other.
Okay, and that might help the question that Gail just had, hopefully, that she just posted there. Okay. So the pitch that I did with you, which do you want to do? Do you want to start chronologically?
Let's do this. Let's do it chronologically. So it's
okay.
an old one that you did do, and it was on behalf of the Museum of Man, now Museum of Us, and it was a number of years ago. And it was, the mummies are coming, lots of them. Next week, mummy scientists from around the world will be traveling to our city for the 7th World Congress on Mummy Studies. To welcome them, the Museum of Man is opening Modern Day Mummy, the Art and Science of Mummification, which includes a mummy from the mid-1990s using 2,000-year-old mummification techniques. On and on and on. It wasn't an obviously weird pitch, but somehow it was successful, and talk about why it caught you.
So this is a situation where you benefited from outside circumstances. At this time, I mean, I was covering a lot of zombie stories. Zombies were kind of like huge and everything. So at some point when you're doing zombie, then comes next the zombie backlash. So, oh, wait a sec, someone's pitching me mummies. Oh, this is the new zombies. So I was able to come up with a hook. And then at the same time, you had a lot of pictures that I knew that I could make a gallery out of that would be kind of shocking, and photos that I knew would make people click so I could get a gallery. And then I think there was a museum in Pennsylvania or Pittsburgh that was doing sort of a similar thing. So I was able to turn your pitch into a trend story about how mummies might be the new zombies or something. And so, I was able to write a kind of a fun story about zombies and about mummies and everything, kind of tying the in. I'm not sure that the story, when I was writing the story, I thought for sure, this is going to be a paradigm shift. This is going to like make, mummies bigger than zombies. It's like, it didn't necessarily do that well, but I mean, it wasn't like a huge hit. I mean, it wasn't a million hit. That's a lot of times, a lot of the stories that I get will get up to 1 million hits, but it did really well for me, and I enjoyed writing it. And at the time,
so in that case, it wasn't, mummies are weird. It wasn't a specific weird pitch.
You had video, you had visuals.
Right, and so we had visuals.
So I've got a few questions for you.
Okay.
How do you draw the line or differentiate between a real journalist creating their own side content versus essentially working as a citizen journalist in their off time?
Do they know the difference between you and your and your?
Right. That's the first step.
Do they know the difference between two, and two, there and there? Those are a couple things.
I'll tell you what we would do immediately. First of all, we Google them. We look at their social media stats. And then there's also tools for deeper research about what kind of engagement they get, what kind of website hits they get. It's pretty easy to do your own research, and we have to do a lot of that because, you're getting a lot of requests from blogs these days. And some are, especially in the food and entertainment and hospitality field. Everybody's jumping on that blog bandwagon because they think it's going to get them a free meal. So there's very many ways to research a journalist.
Well, luckily examiner.com isn't around anymore. That used to be like, I remember joking with some journalists that if you had like 12 seats for a restaurant opening and, you only 11 were filled, let's call Examiner and get one of those citizen journalists to kind of cover the place. And it was kind of, there were a lot of people who did Examiner who I sort of ended up mentoring. And the first thing I did was get away from Examiner. But, I think a lot of times in terms of who's a professional and who isn't, I think for me, I'm in a lucky position that I got a San Diego address and a New York job. So I'm like less likely to be judgy of somebody on whether they're a so-called journalist or not, just because you never know. Today's blogger might end up being tomorrow's Pulitzer Prize winner, maybe. So I try and give them a little bit of slack, especially since it's not my job to provide the free meals or do anything. It's not going to make it. Whereas you actually have a budget you have to work with, Jean. All I have to do is be somewhat civil. So it's easy for me.
David, here's a question for you. There's been a heightened awareness around what is true. With the pandemic, presidential election, and Black Lives Matter movement, how do you address truth in being a respectable journalist?
Well, you got to be able to, you have to be able to double check and verify things. So a lot of times, like for instance, a lot of what I'm doing is like the Twitter reaction stories. Trump will say something and people, on one hand, it's kind of low-hanging fruit. Trump says something crazy. People have a lot of funny clapbacks. I'm doing a lot of cutting, pasting. I probably spend more time writing the head and the deck than I do the actual article. And a lot of it's cutting and pasting. And a lot of times people might look at this as being cheap, but it's sort of a modern version of what would have been the reaction story back before the internet, where I would have actually gone out with my pork pie hat and, asked people the relation. And so, obviously, if someone's saying something, it's an opinion. You've got to, I think a lot of times the differentiation is, what's opinion versus what is fact. I've had to be like on my own social media where it seems like half of the people from my high school are, let's just say they have different views of where the country should be than I do. And sometimes I have to, they'll be calling me, whatever libtard or whatever name they're whatever thing they think is going to kind of insult me. And I have to sometimes be gentle about that. Here's why this little, a lot of times I get pitched a lot of weird stuff, a lot of that are obviously like fake news stories. And so a lot of times when somebody, out of the goodness of their heart, they're sending me this crazy mugshot about somebody that like smuggled eyeballs in their private parts or something. This was a fake story that someone tried to pitch to me. I knew it was fake, and I basically sent them the about page from the website that they were sending that says this is all satirical. And you know, I think I try and keep my own nose clean, but I think we would do a lot better in our country if we actually taught media literacy in our schools, you know, certainly from the high school level, so that people can actually figure out why, you know, the New York Times, even if you have a personal vendetta against them, is more accurate than, you know, some blog that doesn't have lawyers like going over every single little detail to make sure they're accurate.
Dave, what's the best pitch you've ever received, and why is it the best pitch, so we can learn from that?
So I get so many pitches. Remember, I've been doing this for a while, so it's hard for me to think of. Now I because like a lot of, I mean, you know, I was pitched a mother and daughter porn team one time, and I took that story. I mean, you know, it was, I mean, you know, whenever you're dealing with somebody that's like, you know, that's definitely a shocking story. But I always, when I'm interviewing people, try and give them, accept their humanity. I'm not like, you know, the story itself, the mother and daughter team, was going to be wacky enough without me having to do kind of judgy, sarcastic sort of slut shaming sort of things. But I mean, the guy pitched me this, hey, you know, this mother and daughter, they're really close. Really close. I mean, that was basically the opening sentence. And when he explained that they were trying to work together, that they didn't actually they would do scenes in the same room, but not actually together and stuff, it was like setting itself up. And the story ended up being like huge, to the point where the boss was like really kind of like, I'm getting feedback from the publisher that maybe we don't want to, you know, maybe this is a little rough for us. And then like 3 days later, it's like, hey, the editor really liked that story and wants to know if we can do a follow-up. So it's like,
David,
okay.
do you remember the headline for it?
Mother-daughter porn duo Jessica Sexton, Monica Sexton, aiming to be filthy rich. The filthy was sort of a pun. I don't know if you get it, because, you know, it's...
We get it.
Okay, figured.
Jean, I have a question for you. I actually think that's the most lurid story pitch that he got, not the best. That's my judgment.
Well, you know,
Jean,
that's why I'm running weird.
Where did the Ellen show go wrong? People have invested so much time and money in her charities, and now to find out that she's not what she appears to be has been devastating to her followers.
Where did the Ellen show go wrong?
Hiring Ellen?
Yeah, I mean, nipping it in the bud long ago and dealing with this before all of this controversy came out in the public. I mean, it's hard to say that without knowing what everybody knew, but people needed to be aware of what was going on if everybody's coming out of the woodwork saying, yes, she's this horrible person. So it's mainly what went wrong is executives ignoring it and sweeping the bad behavior under the rug because she's a big star and no one wanted to, you know, disagree with her.
Now, I think did you hear what Howard Stern's advice was? Basically, own the fact that you may not be a nice person, and just like when you come back to the school, own it and admit that sometimes that you've done stuff that isn't necessarily perfect, as opposed to try and like show that you've redeemed yourself. Maybe dig in more on who you really are rather than trying to force this fake image.
Go to the positive, talk about all the good you've done in the world, and I don't know. I think it's a tough one. I think, you know, being a celebrity is a horrible existence because, you know, everybody wants something from you. So you never know how people are going to respond to that. But just in general, you know, they just ignored it, which was so stupid.
What do you both think about approaching journalists on social media?
I think I have no problem with it. I've made, you know, I've made a lot of good contacts when I was in PR, starting when I only joined social media after I got laid off from a job and was decided to transition from journalism into PR. And the first thing I did was I went and started besides contacting people that I knew and stuff. I started contacting journalists who I admired, journalists who I was familiar with, people in those positions, and it just sort of and that worked out really well for me. I think creating a social media can give you a situation where a person can get to know you a little bit better without necessarily having to feel like the transactional aspect that often comes on between journalists and PR people. I mean,
which social media channels do you use, David, and how can people reach you in social media?
I'm more likely to be on Facebook. I keep my private, I keep my normal page. I'm more likely to use my regular page as opposed to my fan page, but I think it's D Moye. I'm on Twitter too, D Moye. That's D Moye Weird News. I'm more likely to observe on Twitter rather than commenting, whereas on Facebook, I'm more likely to kind of get into dialogue, and that's where I get more of my stories are more likely to click through Facebook than Twitter, and I don't think it's just a unique thing. I think people in general, Facebook's a better platform for promoting news than Twitter is, and I find that Facebook suits my personality and style of humor a little bit more than Twitter, which can be a little bit more dry because you don't have it's something that I've seen. So I tend to be more of an observer on Twitter, but I'm on Facebook a lot.
And we contact journalists via social media when kind of as a last ditch resort when we haven't been able to reach them for some reason. Mainly through Twitter, probably. I say this, but it's like if everybody starts, tweeting at journalists or DMing people, then we're gonna be doomed. But we do use it just like last resort, and we usually get a pretty good response.
Let's see. Do you think journalists using Twitter and social media to grab story ideas without going out into the field, is that hurting journalistic integrity? And are news persons stretched too thin? Is that the only option now?
So the thing is that if somebody has gone to if somebody has gone to compose their thoughts in a clever tweet using a Justin Bieber meme, GIF, or a Sure Jan meme or something, and I see nothing wrong with using that. It's as opposed to going out. I mean, because the thing is, from an efficient standpoint, if someone's going to basically, if the same end result is going to be, a comment about whatever news is happening, and somebody's already put it on Twitter that you can, and it's in a form that's visual, I see nothing wrong with that. Where I'm not doing in-depth stuff. A lot of my stuff, I mean, the team that I'm on, the Now team, our job is to, there are people that do long form stories. I do short stuff. My stories are usually no more than 200 words. It's to get it up there, get it so people can read. So Twitter makes it a lot easier for people to get the basic news. Otherwise, I'd be like, I wouldn't be doing 3 to 5 stories a day, and I'd be like sitting there, pondering, and I'm not a good ponderer. I need to just write the story and get it up there, and Twitter helps a lot with those aspects.
What about video? David, one of the questions is, what would you prefer, 30-second video or 1-minute video?
Okay, so if I'm using a video in a story, ideally it's going to be less than 2 minutes. 30 seconds, a lot of times we're using, like at the top of our stories, we're using in-house video, and it's ideally a video is longer than a minute, less than 2 minutes. A 30-second video isn't necessarily a good user experience, we've found. So I'd say about 2 minutes would be helpful. If there's a compelling video, a compelling visual that I can like screenshot to possibly put in the front page, that helps too. I work with a lot of like TV shows, and they'll send over like a clip from they'll send over a clip. I'll occasionally do these clip articles. Somebody has a news clip of an upcoming thing. I basically am writing a 100-word intro and then letting the tweet or letting the video do the hard work. If the video is just like really lame. And there's a lot of times where I've had to like tell the publicist, you've got to go back to the editing guys, tell them to stop eating the frickin' Cheetos and give me something that people are going to actually watch. Cause they just, this video, there's nothing in it. It's like, you know, and that's something that the video has to have something that's going to be visually compelling that people actually want to look at it. Otherwise, why are you sending me this video?
And Jean, quickly, we only have like 1 or 2 minutes left. Are you using video when you're reaching out to journalists, or do you do that after it's requested?
We usually, typically we do it after the fact. We work with the United States Parachute Association, which is the National Association of Skydivers. So the video is so unbelievably exciting and great that we might put a clip in a pitch. But for the most part, we use it after the fact. Yeah.
And then one last question. Let's see if you can answer in 30 seconds. Do you use SEO or search for on organizations and companies?
HuffPost actually has a full-time audience team that we collect. There's a writing staff, and then there's the audience team, and so we will run headlines by them to see what's going to be the most search engine friendly. We will, try and come up with angles and stuff so that we're not duplicating headlines from other places that might do this. And I've found that has really helped me an awful lot. I've learned, I've learned a little bit about how to do things, but the hard part is that they'll suggest sample heads, and so I've had to write the words clap back more than I feel like a 55-year-old guy should, because clap back apparently resonates well on SEO, say better than snark or whatever. So I've learned there's sometimes where it's really funny with the headlines. I'll write these headlines that are obviously more useful than I might write, and then we'll get a nasty remark from somebody who's calling me a goddamn millennial, and it's like, okay, I'll take that. I'm 55.
Take that.
Oh, this has been so enlightening, and I hope helpful to everyone who's here. I want to thank Jean and David for your insights and humor and entertaining us with all these great stories. And thank all of you for joining us tonight. If you want any more information about the San Diego Press Club, about our upcoming events, membership, or the Excellence in Journalism Awards, please visit the website at sdpressclub.org, and have a great night.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming.